The lobby of the Grand Magnolia Hotel in downtown Atlanta sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Guests in tailored suits hurried past bellhops, their polished shoes clicking against marble floors. The faint scent of jasmine from the ornate floral arrangements lingered in the air, a reminder of the hotel's reputation for refinement. Beneath all this elegance, however, pulsed an undercurrent invisible to most, the quiet judgment that separated those who were deemed worthy of this space from those who were not. Danielle Brooks paused just beyond the revolving glass doors, taking in the grandeur with a calm, steady gaze. She wore a modest navy dress, her natural curls pulled back, a simple handbag resting on her shoulder. To any passerby, she might appear to be just another woman stepping in from the heat of a Georgia afternoon. Yet Danielle carried with her something few could imagine. She was the owner of Brooks Hospitality Group, the chain that had recently acquired this very hotel. Her heart swelled with memories as she crossed the threshold. Years earlier, she had entered hotels through side doors, mop in hand, tasked with cleaning the very hallways she now owned. Back then, she never thought a day like this would come, when she could walk into a lobby not as staff or guest, but as the ultimate decision-maker. Still, Danielle chose to arrive without announcement, preferring to feel the atmosphere from the ground level, unfiltered by rehearsed greetings and prepared smiles. Behind the reception desk, a young employee smiled nervously at the incoming crowd. To the side, the hotel manager, Richard Hale, scanned the lobby with a practiced air of authority. His suit was pressed to perfection, his posture sharp, his eyes calculating as he assessed every person who entered. Richard prided himself on maintaining the image of the hotel. Anyone who did not fit into that polished image, anyone who appeared too ordinary, too out of place, was a disruption to his carefully curated environment. When his eyes landed on Danielle, he frowned. She was alone, carrying no suitcase, no visible reservation printout. To him, her presence clashed with the stream of executives and luxury travelers filing through the lobby. He walked swiftly toward her, his polished shoes echoing in sharp contrast to her quiet, unhurried steps. "Excuse me, ma'am," Richard said firmly, positioning himself between Danielle and the reception desk. His tone carried the weight of superiority, coated in the thin veneer of professional politeness. "Staff should be using the service entrance. Guests expect discretion." Danielle's calm eyes met his, unblinking. For a moment, silence stretched between them, the hum of lobby conversations fading into the background. She could feel the weight of his assumption pressing down on her, the same old prejudice she had faced countless times before. But instead of anger, she felt a stillness within herself, as though the years of struggle had forged an armor he could not pierce. "I'm not staff," she replied softly, her voice steady, warm, and composed. Richard smirked, unconvinced. "Of course. But really, if you're here to help housekeeping, please use the side door. This is not the place for uniforms." His voice carried further than he intended, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. The young receptionist looked up nervously, her lips parting as if she wanted to intervene, but hesitation froze her. Danielle noticed the girl's discomfort, her conscience battling with fear of overstepping authority. Danielle gave her the smallest reassuring nod, a silent acknowledgement that the moment was bigger than both of them. Richard, impatient, cleared his throat. "Let's not cause a scene," he added, his jaw tightening as though her quiet composure somehow challenged him more than defiance would have. Danielle held his gaze, her heart beating with controlled intensity. She thought of the irony. After years of building something brick by brick, she stood here, dismissed as if she were invisible. She said nothing more, choosing instead to let Richard's assumptions echo in the space between them. And as the tension thickened, one truth became clear. This was not merely a misunderstanding. It was the spark of something larger, a test of dignity and perception that would soon shift the ground beneath everyone in that grand lobby. Before we continue, if you believe stories of resilience, justice, and unexpected triumphs deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe now. That way you'll never miss the next inspiring journey that challenges the way we see the world. Danielle's silence lingered like a held breath, and with it, the stage was set for what was about to unfold. Long before Danielle Brooks stood in marble lobbies, She had known the creak of old wooden floors in a small house on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama. The summer air there was heavy with the scent of pine and red clay, a world away from polished hotels and gleaming chandeliers. She was raised by her mother, Lorraine, a woman of quiet strength who carried exhaustion in her shoulders, yet never allowed despair to reach her eyes. Lorraine worked 2 jobs, days in a diner, nights cleaning classrooms at the local school, always reminding Danielle that dignity was not tied to what people thought of her, but to how she carried herself. Danielle often waited by the screen door, listening for her mother's footsteps in the gravel after long shifts. "Mama, you're tired again," she would whisper when Lorraine entered, dusting chalk from her palms. Lorraine would smile faintly, kiss her daughter's forehead and say, "Baby, tired don't mean defeated, we don't give up." Not in this house. The neighborhood around them was modest, marked by narrow streets where children played basketball with dented rims and rusted hoops. Dreams there seemed boxed in by limits, yet Danielle carried an imagination that stretched beyond every fence. In school, she wrote essays about places she had never seen, sketching lobbies with tall ceilings and grand staircases. Teachers praised her talent, but classmates teased her ambitions, saying she belonged in the same jobs her mother worked. The first time Danielle ever stepped into a hotel lobby was when her mother brought her along on a cleaning shift at a roadside inn. She remembered being transfixed by the lobby's shiny floor tiles, though they were cracked and scuffed. The faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air, and she noticed how guests barely acknowledged her mother as she vacuumed around their luggage. Danielle felt a knot in her chest. She wanted more for her mother and more for herself. At 12, Danielle began helping her mother scrub bathrooms at the school. She hated the smell of bleach, but she loved the sense of teamwork, the rhythm of her mother humming gospel tunes as they worked side by side. Those nights, lying in bed with sore arms, Danielle promised herself that her future would not be limited by what others assumed about her. Still, obstacles rose like walls around her. Money was scarce, and the idea of college seemed as distant as the glittering skylines she saw in magazines. At school, guidance counselors encouraged her toward practical work, warning her not to set goals too high. Yet Danielle had inherited her mother's quiet resilience. She began babysitting and tutoring younger kids for a few extra dollars, saving coins in a jar marked dreams. It was around this time she developed a fascination with hospitality. To Danielle, hotels were more than buildings. They were places of arrival and possibility, where every person deserved to feel valued. She studied hotel brochures borrowed from the library, memorizing layouts of lobbies, imagining how she would design them herself one day. When her friends laughed, saying, "You think you'll own a hotel? Girl, that's crazy." Danielle simply smiled. Inside, she held on to Lorraine's words. Tired doesn't mean defeated. One evening, while folding laundry, Danielle asked her mother, "Do you think people like us could ever run a place like that? A big hotel?" Lorraine paused, her hands resting on a faded towel. She looked at her daughter with quiet conviction. "Baby, somebody owns it. Why not you? Don't let anybody tell you what you can't do." That seed of belief rooted itself deep within Danielle's spirit. Though the world around her seemed determined to remind her of limitations, she began to imagine ways to climb higher. Every sweeping motion of a broom, every scrubbed floor, became not just a chore, but a lesson in discipline. She was learning the business from the ground up, even if no one else saw it that way. As she grew older, she realized the path ahead would demand more than endurance. It would demand courage, patience, and a relentless refusal to let the world shrink her vision. The girl from Montgomery was beginning to shape herself into someone who could rise far beyond the boundaries drawn around her, and this was only the beginning. By the time Danielle turned 18, her determination had sharpened into action. With her high school diploma in hand and little more than a few $100s saved from babysitting and part-time shifts at the diner, she applied for her first official job in hospitality. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't managerial. It was housekeeping at a mid-range hotel off Peachtree Street in Atlanta. The interview was brief. The head of housekeeping, a stern woman named Mrs. Jenkins, looked Danielle up and down and said, "It's hard work. You'll be on your feet all day. Pays minimum. Still want it? Danielle nodded firmly. Yes, ma'am. I'm ready to work. Her first day began before dawn. She buttoned her uniform, a stiff grey dress with white trim, and tightened the apron strings around her waist. The hotel's service corridors smelled of industrial detergent and faint mildew, a stark contrast to the citrus-scented lobby guests experienced. Pushing her cart filled with sheets and cleaning supplies, Danielle felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Every room she entered was a new test of patience and thoroughness. Guests often brushed past her as though she were invisible. Some barely offered a glance, others left messes that spoke of carelessness or entitlement. Yet Danielle refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, she studied details, the way the bedspreads were tucked with sharp corners, how the front desk handled phone calls, how the bellhops greeted each arrival. While her hands scrubbed bathtubs and polished mirrors, her mind absorbed the mechanics of the hotel's operation. Still, the job tested her pride. One afternoon, a guest left crumbs scattered across the carpet and pizza boxes stacked by the door. As Danielle gathered the trash, the guest returned unexpectedly. He glanced at her and muttered to his companion, "Housekeeping's here, let's go." No greeting, no acknowledgement. Danielle kept her face calm, though inside she felt a pang of smallness. Later, in the break room, she confided in another maid, Maria Lopez, a warm-spirited woman from Texas who quickly became her closest friend. "They look right through us, Maria," Danielle sighed, sipping lukewarm coffee. Maria shrugged but smiled. "Let them look past us. We see each other, and maybe one day they'll see us differently." That bond of shared struggle gave Danielle strength. Together they exchanged stories, jokes, and quiet dreams. Maria dreamed of sending her younger siblings to college. Danielle confessed in a low voice, "Sometimes I think about owning a hotel myself." Maria's eyes widened, then softened into a grin. "Why not? You've got the brains for it. Don't let this uniform fool you." Encouragement like that mattered. It reminded Danielle that her worth wasn't defined by how others treated her. She learned resilience through every shift, even on days when exhaustion pressed down like a heavy blanket. The hardest moments came when managers barked orders without looking her in the eye, or when guests assumed she couldn't speak proper English. Danielle answered with politeness, her dignity intact, but deep down she stored every slight like fuel. Each dismissal was proof of the gap she intended to close one day. One evening, as she finished her shift, Danielle paused in the lobby. She stood quietly in a corner, still in uniform, watching businessmen check in. She observed their confident stride, the way managers greeted them with deference. For a fleeting second, she imagined herself not in the grey dress, but in a tailored suit, giving instructions instead of taking them. The vision lit a fire in her chest. Walking home under the warm Atlanta night, city lights reflecting off high glass towers, Danielle whispered to herself, "This isn't forever. This is just the beginning." Her footsteps echoed on the pavement, steady and determined, each one carrying her further from limitation and closer to the future she had already begun to imagine. What Danielle didn't know yet was how small sparks of ambition, nurtured in quiet moments like these, would soon shape the course of her life in ways no one around her could have predicted. Late one evening, when most of the hotel hallways had quieted and only the hum of vending machines filled the silence, Danielle found herself alone in the break room. On the counter lay a hardcover book left behind by a guest, its dust jacket creased, but the title bold, The Entrepreneur's Blueprint. Curiosity tugged at her. She opened it, expecting dry numbers and jargon, but instead found stories of ordinary people who built businesses from scratch. The words seemed to reach out and grab her. She read about determination, about risk, about starting with nothing but a vision. For the first time, Danielle considered that owning a hotel wasn't just a fantasy whispered in passing. It could be a path if she had the courage to take it. She began carrying the book in her bag, reading it during breaks, sometimes late into the night after long shifts. The more she read, the clearer her own ambition became. She didn't just want to serve in hotels. She wanted to run them, design them, shape them into places where dignity flowed in every direction, from guests to staff alike. One afternoon, while folding linens beside Maria, Danielle finally shared the spark that had been growing inside her. "Maria," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no supervisor was near, "what if one day I owned a hotel? Not just worked in one, but actually owned it." Maria paused, eyes widening. Then she chuckled softly, not out of mockery but surprise. "Girl, that's a big dream, but you've got fire in you. I see it every day. Don't let anybody tell you it's too much." Danielle smiled, relief washing over her. To voice the dream aloud made it feel real, like planting a seed in open soil. Yet not everyone was encouraging. Later that week, when she mentioned her ambition to a shift supervisor in passing, he laughed outright. "You? Own a hotel? Danielle, maids don't become owners. You'd better keep your feet on the ground." The sting of those words lingered, but rather than discourage her, they hardened her resolve. She carried them like a weight in her chest, promising herself that one day she would prove him wrong. Not for revenge, but to show that boundaries placed by others were not permanent walls. At home, Danielle began sketching her ideas in a notebook. She drew floor plans of lobbies with open spaces, guest rooms with thoughtful touches, and notes about staff policies that valued every worker. She imagined a place where no employee felt invisible, where dignity wasn't selective. Her mother noticed her scribbling late at night. "What are you working on, baby?" Lorraine asked, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Danielle hesitated, then confessed, "Dreams, Mama. I want to own a hotel one day." Lorraine studied her, pride and concern mingling in her expression. "That's a tall mountain, but I've watched you climb since you were little. If anyone's stubborn enough to reach the top, it's you. Just don't let this world convince you to stop climbing." Those words became a quiet anthem inside Danielle. Each morning when she laced her uniform, she carried not only the sting of doubt but the strength of her mother's faith. Though the dream was fragile and distant, it had begun to take shape. She wasn't ready yet, and obstacles loomed large: money, education, opportunity. But Danielle had something that couldn't be dismissed. A vision that glowed brighter with each passing day. And visions once ignited are not easily extinguished. Danielle's days remained long, her hours consumed by cleaning rooms and scrubbing floors, but her nights began to take on a new rhythm. After shifts ended, when most co-workers hurried home, she walked a few blocks to a small community college tucked between storefronts. The classrooms smelled faintly of chalk and fresh paint, and the buzz of fluorescent lights filled the silence. There she enrolled in evening courses for hospitality management, determined to learn the theory behind what she already practiced every day. It wasn't easy. She often arrived with sore feet, her uniform folded neatly into her bag, and her eyelids heavy from exhaustion. But once class began, her fatigue seemed to fade. Listening to professors speak about operations, customer service models, and financial planning lit something inside her. She scribbled notes with ferocity, hungry for knowledge. At first, some classmates doubted her seriousness. A young man beside her one evening whispered, "Why study all this? You're just a maid, right?" Danielle turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. "I'm not just anything. I'm preparing for something bigger." Her tone was steady, unshaken, and he looked away, embarrassed. Balancing school with work proved brutal. She slept in short bursts, her mornings beginning before sunrise and her nights ending long after midnight. Some days her body begged her to give up, but every time she considered it, she remembered her mother's voice. Tired doesn't mean defeated. Those words carried her through. Her dedication did not go unnoticed. After a year, she was promoted from maid to housekeeping supervisor. The general manager, impressed by her initiative, praised her for creating a system that made room turnover faster without sacrificing cleanliness. "You think like management," he told her. Danielle smiled politely, though inside she thought, "No. I think like an owner." The promotion brought a modest pay raise. It wasn't much, but it meant she could save more aggressively. Every dollar not needed for food, rent, or tuition went into a small account she nicknamed the Dream Fund. On nights when doubt crept in, she opened the account statement, watching the balance grow little by little, proof that progress was possible. Maria celebrated every milestone with her. "Supervisor Brooks," she teased one afternoon, wrapping Danielle in a playful hug. "Look at you, moving up the ladder." Danielle laughed, though she kept her humility intact. "It's only the first step, Maria. There's a long way to go." Still, the challenges were constant. There were times when professors spoke of financial models she couldn't fully grasp. She stayed after class to ask questions, enduring the long bus ride home with textbooks heavy in her lap. There were weeks when rent nearly swallowed her savings, when she skipped meals to stretch her budget. Yet the vision of something greater always pulled her forward. One evening, while reviewing an assignment on budgeting, Danielle whispered to herself, "One day I'll have a place that reflects everything I've learned, and it'll be mine." The thought steadied her like a guiding star. At work, she applied her lessons quietly. She suggested small adjustments, such as reorganizing supply closets to save staff time or rotating tasks to prevent burnout. Some managers ignored her, but others noticed the efficiency. Slowly, her reputation grew, not as a maid, but as a thinker, a problem solver. Each success added a brick to the foundation she was building for her future. And though her path remained uncertain, Danielle began to feel a shift. She was no longer surviving day by day. She was moving towards something bigger, piece by piece. The girl from Montgomery had begun to take her first real steps into a world that had once seemed unreachable. By the time Danielle reached her mid-20s, her savings account had grown from spare coins in a jar to something substantial. It wasn't enough to buy a dream hotel in the heart of Atlanta, but it was a start. Maria, ever loyal, had been saving too, setting aside money from her own wages. One night, seated at Danielle's small kitchen table with notebooks and coffee mugs between them, Maria said, "There's a rundown motel just outside the city. I heard it's for sale, cheap because it's practically falling apart." Danielle leaned forward, eyes alive with possibility. "Cheap doesn't scare me. Falling apart just means potential. Where others see a mess, we'll see opportunity." The next weekend, they drove to see it. The building sat off a busy highway, paint peeling, neon sign flickering with half the letters dark. A few cars were parked haphazardly, the lot cracked with weeds sprouting through. To many, it looked hopeless. To Danielle, it looked like a blank canvas. Inside, the smell of mildew clung to every wall. Carpets were stained, plumbing leaked, and the office computer was outdated by decades. The owner, an older man with weary eyes, shrugged as he showed them around. "Business is slow. I'm ready to let it go," he said. Danielle exchanged a glance with Maria. Despite the grime, she saw structure. The walls were solid, the layout practical, the location promising, close enough to the city for travelers, yet affordable for families. Danielle whispered, "We can work with this." Securing the purchase was no easy feat. Banks doubted them, skeptical of two young women, one black, one Latina, with little collateral. "It's too risky," one loan officer said, sliding back their application. Danielle walked out of the building with her jaw set, refusing to let rejection break her. They tried again and again, facing the same doubtful looks. Finally, a small local credit union, impressed by Danielle's detailed business plan and relentless persistence, agreed to lend part of the money. Combining that loan with their savings, Danielle and Maria signed the papers. They were now the owners of a shabby 20-room motel. The first months tested every ounce of their strength. They couldn't afford contractors for everything, so they scrubbed mold from bathrooms themselves, hauled out broken furniture, and painted walls late into the night. Maria joked, "We didn't buy a motel, we adopted a patient in intensive care." Danielle laughed, though her muscles ached from the labor. "Then we're the doctors, and we're not losing this patient." There were nights Danielle collapsed onto a mattress on the floor of one of the rooms. Her hands blistered from work, her body screaming for rest. But when the morning sun hit the building, glinting off fresh paint, she felt hope rise again. Slowly, the place transformed. The rooms smelled of new carpet. The lobby glowed with second-hand furniture polished to a shine, and the sign outside now gleamed in bright neon, Magnolia Inn. Attracting guests was another battle. People passing by still saw the old, broken reputation. Danielle stood at the front desk each evening, greeting every traveler with a warm smile, offering affordable rates and a promise of cleanliness. Maria handed out flyers at gas stations, while Danielle convinced local businesses to recommend their inn. Their efforts began to pay off. Truck drivers, families on road trips, and budget-conscious tourists trickled in. Word spread. The little motel by the highway was clean, safe, and run by women who cared. Guests left with gratitude, some even leaving notes praising the kindness of the owners. One night, Maria closed the ledger and grinned. "We actually turned a profit this month." Danielle's eyes shimmered with pride. "This is just the start. From here we build." And though the road ahead remained uncertain, the foundation had been laid, one brick of sweat, sacrifice, and faith at a time. The Magnolia Inn stood as proof that grit could turn decay into promise. But Danielle wasn't satisfied with surviving. She wanted growth, expansion, a foothold beyond a single highway motel. Each evening, after tallying receipts and making sure the last guest was settled, she sat with Maria at the desk, notebook open, sketching ideas for what could come next. "We can't stop here," Danielle said one night, tapping her pen against the margin. "If we reinvest everything, we can look for a second property. Maybe closer to the airport, where business travelers need affordable stays." Maria frowned, chewing the end of her pencil. "That sounds good, Danny, but banks barely trusted us the first time. What if they won't lend again?" Danielle leaned back, her eyes steady. "Then we make them believe. We show them what we've already done. Numbers speak louder than doubts." With their first year's modest profit in hand, Danielle began approaching lenders again. But prejudice followed her. At one meeting, a banker in a grey suit skimmed her proposal and said with a patronizing smile, "It's impressive that you've managed this far, but expansion, hospitality is competitive. Maybe it's best to stay small." The words stung, yet Danielle refused to let them linger. She rose, gathered her papers, and answered firmly, "I didn't come this far to stay small." Outside the office, her hands trembled with frustration, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. "If one door closes, I'll find another." They faced rejection after rejection. Some doubted their business model, others their ability. A few didn't bother to hide that what unsettled them wasn't the numbers, but the faces presenting them. Still, Danielle pressed on, sharpening her pitch, refining her projections, knocking on doors others might have given up on. Finally, a glimmer of hope appeared. At a local networking event, Danielle met Charles Whitman, a seasoned investor with silver hair and a sharp eye. He listened intently as she explained her vision. Unlike the others, he didn't interrupt, didn't smirk. When she finished, he said simply, "Show me the books." Danielle handed over financial statements, occupancy rates, and guest reviews. Charles studied them, nodding slowly. "You've taken a dying property and revived it. That takes discipline, not luck. Expansion is risky, but I see potential." Maria whispered later, half in disbelief, "Do you think he's serious?" Danielle smiled faintly. "I think he recognizes something the others couldn't." After weeks of review, Charles agreed to invest in their second property, matching their savings with his own funds. His support didn't come without conditions. He wanted regular reports, oversight on major decisions, but Danielle welcomed the accountability. "If this is what it takes to grow, I'll prove we can deliver," she told him. The second property was a budget hotel near Atlanta's airport, worn down but in a prime location. From the start, Danielle implemented lessons learned at Magnolia Inn. She focused on cleanliness, genuine service, and affordable rates, training staff to greet each guest with warmth. Slowly, the reputation grew. Business travelers appreciated the convenience, and families valued the price. Expansion brought new challenges. Danielle juggled staff shortages, fluctuating costs, and the stress of managing multiple sites. Some nights she lay awake, anxiety gnawing at her. What if she had pushed too far, too fast? Yet each morning, she rose with renewed determination, reminding herself why she started. One evening, as the second hotel's occupancy chart filled with steady bookings, Maria looked at her with awe. "Danny, we're really doing this. 2 properties." "Who would have thought?" Danielle smiled, though her mind was already racing ahead. "This is just the beginning, Maria. I can feel it. We're building something bigger than both of us." And in that moment, though the road remained uncertain, Danielle knew she was no longer dreaming in sketches and notebooks. She was building an empire, one property at a time. The success of the airport property marked a turning point for Danielle Brooks. For the first time, she wasn't simply surviving the challenges of ownership, she was commanding them. With 2 steady businesses under her belt, her reputation began to ripple beyond Atlanta. Articles in small hospitality magazines highlighted her hands-on leadership and her commitment to community-focused hospitality. Danielle clipped each mention, not out of vanity, but as proof that her work was real, visible, undeniable. Her strategy was clear: reinvest profits into growth, no lavish spending, no shortcuts. Every extra dollar went toward scouting new properties. Over the next few years, she acquired additional mid-range hotels across Georgia, then slowly branched into neighboring states, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina. Each acquisition came with its own battle, negotiating skeptical sellers, repairing rundown buildings, retraining staff who had grown weary under careless management. But Danielle's philosophy never wavered. She insisted on respect from the top down. At every property, she walked the halls, introduced herself to housekeepers, shook hands with maintenance workers. "No one in my hotels is invisible," she told Maria during a staff meeting. "If we're going to build something lasting, it starts with how we treat the people who keep these doors open," her employees noticed. At one location, a young front desk clerk confided, "You're the first owner who's ever remembered my name." Danielle smiled warmly. "Names matter. People matter. That's how we build loyalty, inside and out." Guests, too, began to recognize the difference. Online reviews praised not just cleanliness and affordability, but also the genuine kindness of staff. Families wrote about feeling welcome, business travelers noted the professionalism, and communities around her hotels began to view her chain as a reliable neighbor. Still, the road upward was not smooth. Competitors sneered, dismissing her achievements as temporary. Some whispered that her success was a fluke, that she lacked the pedigree of traditional hoteliers. When one rival openly remarked at a conference, "She just got lucky with cheap properties," Danielle smiled calmly, though inside she burned with determination. Later, she told Maria, "Luck doesn't scrub bathrooms at midnight. Luck doesn't balance ledgers until dawn. If they call this luck, then let's keep proving what our luck can do." Expansion also meant more pressure. Danielle traveled constantly, moving from property to property, ensuring quality didn't slip. Long hours away from home tested her endurance. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, moments when she questioned whether she could keep scaling without losing the soul of her vision. But every time doubt whispered, Danielle remembered her mother's words and her own promise. Tired doesn't mean defeated. To ease the burden, she built a leadership team, carefully promoting employees who shared her values. Maria became her right hand, overseeing operations with the same passion Danielle carried. "We're not just running hotels," Maria often said in meetings, echoing Danielle's philosophy. "We're shaping experiences. We're building dignity." As Brooks' hospitality group expanded, Danielle found herself invited to speak at industry events. Standing before crowds of aspiring entrepreneurs, she told her story, not glamorized but raw, filled with the sweat and setbacks behind her rise. "I started with nothing but a mop and a dream," she told one audience. "If you believe limits define you, they will. But if you believe you can outlast them, you just might." Applause filled the room, but Danielle didn't bask in it. She returned to work with renewed purpose, knowing the true test was still ahead. Success wasn't a finish line, it was a responsibility. And as her chain grew, stretching across state lines, Danielle began to sense the weight of what she was building. The little girl from Montgomery had become a force in American hospitality. Yet with every step forward, she understood that challenges would continue to rise, some from outside, some from within. The question was not whether obstacles would come, but how she would meet them. Atlanta had always carried a complicated weight for Danielle Brooks. It was the city where she first scrubbed floors in silence, where she carried buckets of supplies down endless corridors. It was also the city where her empire had first taken root, where Magnolia Inn gave her a foothold and a reason to believe her vision wasn't impossible. Returning now, years later, was not just business, it was personal. A historic luxury hotel had recently gone up for sale in downtown Atlanta, its marble columns and ornate ceilings still striking, though its reputation had begun to fade under outdated management. Danielle studied the property from afar before moving to secure it through Brooks Hospitality Group. To most of the city, the transaction was just another headline about an expanding hotel chain. To Danielle, it was a homecoming, an unspoken victory lap for the girl who once mopped its lobbies unseen. When the deal closed, Maria beamed at her across the conference table. "Can you believe it, Danny? You own it now." The kind of place we used to dream about, with chandeliers and velvet carpets. Danielle smiled softly, but her tone carried weight. "It's not about chandeliers, Maria. It's about what this building represents. I started here at the bottom. Now, I want to see how my people are treated when no one knows I'm the owner." That thought lingered with her. Unlike other acquisitions, she decided she would visit this hotel unannounced, blending in with the ordinary flow of people. She wanted the raw truth, not rehearsed greetings or polished speeches. Only then would she know what kind of culture lived inside those walls. A week later, Danielle dressed simply for her quiet arrival. She chose a modest blouse and slacks, her curls pulled back in a way that gave her an understated appearance. Carrying only a small handbag, she blended into the crowd of downtown pedestrians. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, honking cars, street vendors calling out, the scent of roasted peanuts mixing with exhaust. As she approached the towering entrance, she slowed her pace, heart steady but expectant. Inside, the lobby gleamed with a kind of old-world charm. The polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of chandeliers, while plush chairs lined the edges of the grand room. Travelers in tailored suits tapped on laptops, and tourists marveled at the gilded architecture. Danielle inhaled deeply, memories colliding with the present. She could almost see her younger self pushing a cart of supplies, ignored by the very guests now sipping cocktails at the bar. But this time, she wasn't staff. She wasn't invisible. She owned the building, every square foot of it, yet as she stepped further into the space, she noticed the sharp gaze of the hotel's manager, Richard Hale. He stood with the air of someone who believed he was the gatekeeper of refinement. His dark suit pressed sharply, his tie knotted with precision. He scanned the lobby with narrowed eyes, guarding it as though it were his personal kingdom. Danielle felt his stare land on her, assessing, measuring. She offered no explanation for her presence, choosing instead to observe. She knew from experience that true character revealed itself in unguarded moments. Richard began to walk toward her, his polished shoes striking against the marble, each step deliberate. Danielle straightened her posture, her face calm, her expression unreadable. In her chest, her heart thudded with a quiet intensity. This was exactly why she had come, not for comfort, but for clarity. The lobby, so full of light and chatter, suddenly felt like a stage where something unspoken was about to unfold. Danielle didn't know yet what words would pass between them, but she sensed the tension building, an invisible line drawn in the elegant air of the hotel she now commanded. Richard Hale closed the distance between himself and Danielle with the stiff precision of a man convinced of his authority. His jaw was set, his brows slightly arched, and his tone, when he finally spoke, carried the sharp edge of rehearsed professionalism mixed with condescension. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice but keeping it firm, "this entrance is reserved for guests. Staff are expected to use the service entrance at the side of the building." Danielle's calm eyes met his. For a moment she said nothing, her silence both disarming and unnerving. Around them, the lobby carried on, faint jazz from hidden speakers, the rustle of newspapers, the clink of glasses from the bar. But within their small circle, the air grew heavy. "I'm not staff," she answered softly, her tone steady, unshaken. Richard tilted his head, unconvinced. He glanced at her modest attire, at the simple bag slung over her shoulder, and his lips tightened. "I see. Still, if you're here to work, you'll need to follow protocol. guests expect professionalism. "We can't have uniforms wandering the lobby during peak hours." The words, spoken with the calm cruelty of assumption, cut deeper than volume ever could. Danielle remained still, but a storm brewed within her. Memories surged, of pushing carts down narrow hallways, of being dismissed by managers who saw only what they wanted. But instead of letting anger surface, she anchored herself in composure. "I'm not in uniform," she replied. Her voice was measured, her eyes unwavering. Richard gave a thin smile, the kind meant to mask irritation with false politeness. "All the same, I'll ask you to use the side entrance from now on. Let's maintain appearances. We pride ourselves on order here." Nearby, a young receptionist, Emily Carter, looked up from her desk. Her fingers froze above the keyboard as her eyes darted toward the exchange. Danielle noticed the hesitation in Emily's expression, the flicker of discomfort, but also the fear of speaking against her superior. Danielle inhaled slowly, willing herself not to rush this moment. She wanted to see it fully, to understand who Richard was when he thought no one important was watching. Richard shifted, sensing her unwillingness to move. His voice sharpened. "Ma'am, I'm not going to repeat myself. This is a 5-star establishment. If you're here for housekeeping, please remember your place." The lobby seemed to hush, as though the chandeliers themselves leaned in. A businessman seated nearby glanced over his newspaper. A couple at the concierge desk paused mid-conversation. Danielle felt the weight of countless eyes grazing the moment without fully seeing it, just as she had been overlooked for so many years. Inside, her chest tightened, not from shame, but from the sheer irony of standing in her own building and being barred from its heart. The anger was there, yes, but deeper still was a resolve, a kind of quiet steel that had carried her from Montgomery's dusty streets to this very lobby. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the silence stretch, her gaze locked on Richard's with a calmness that unsettled him more than protest ever could. Behind the front desk, Emily shifted in her seat, her conscience at war with her fear. Danielle caught her eye and offered the faintest nod, a silent assurance that the moment was bigger than her hesitation. Richard straightened his jacket, mistaking Danielle's stillness for submission. "Good," he muttered, as if the matter were settled. But Danielle knew differently. She knew the story of this encounter had only begun, and the reckoning it would bring was inevitable. In the heart of her own hotel, Danielle Brooks stood accused of not belonging, and though she hadn't yet revealed her truth, every second that passed tightened the rope Richard was unknowingly tying around himself. Richard Hale's voice carried farther than he realized. Though he spoke with the clipped cadence of a manager trying to keep order, his tone was sharp enough to cut through the hum of the lobby. "I told you," he said again, louder this time. "Housekeeping needs to use the service entrance. Guests shouldn't have to watch staff loitering here." A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Conversations faltered. A businessman lowered his newspaper, eyebrows narrowing. Two women near the concierge desk exchanged glances, whispering. The lobby, once filled with casual chatter, now held a tension that hummed beneath the chandeliers. Danielle stood rooted, her posture straight, her face calm. Inside, her chest swelled with the same ache she had felt countless times before. The sting of being unseen, misjudged, reduced to a stereotype. But this time was different. She wasn't the powerless young maid she had once been. She was the owner of the very space Richard claimed to protect. And yet she chose silence, letting him unravel his own arrogance before witnesses who would remember every word. "Do you hear me?" Richard pressed, his voice climbing. "This lobby is for paying guests, not for staff to wander around as if they belong here." Danielle's reply was soft, measured. "I hear you." Something in her tone unsettled him. For a moment his words stumbled, though his pride forced him to recover quickly. He crossed his arms as though reinforcing an invisible barrier between them. From behind the desk, Emily Carter's conscience gnawed at her. She had seen the woman's composure, the quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with Richard's impatience. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. Should she step in? But fear held her back, the fear of losing her job, of crossing her superior. Danielle noticed, she always noticed. A flicker of sympathy stirred in her chest for the young receptionist, caught in the crossfire of another person's arrogance. Danielle offered her a small, almost imperceptible smile as if to say, "It's all right, don't risk yourself yet." Richard, mistaking Danielle's stillness for weakness, leaned closer. His voice was sharp enough now to draw stares from nearly every corner of the room. "If you want to keep working here, you'll follow the rules. Otherwise, I'll have to reconsider your position." The words struck with a cruel irony, firing the owner in her own lobby. Danielle felt a rush of heat under her skin, not from humiliation, but from the sheer absurdity of the moment. She breathed deeply, steadying herself. This wasn't the time for revelation. Not yet. She wanted him to show every ounce of who he truly was before she pulled back the curtain. Guests shifted uneasily. One man muttered under his breath, "That seems harsh." A woman nearby frowned, whispering, "She doesn't look like staff to me." Doubt was spreading, but Richard remained blind to it, too wrapped in his own authority to sense the shifting tide. Danielle finally spoke again, her voice calm, deliberate. "You're certain this is how you want to handle the situation?" Richard gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Absolutely. Standards matter here, and if you can't respect that, then you don't belong in this lobby." For a heartbeat, silence followed, thick as the Georgia humidity outside. Danielle let his words linger, filling the space, letting every witness absorb their weight. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She simply stood in quiet dignity, her expression unreadable, her gaze unwavering. The irony burned inside her chest, standing in the heart of her own empire, treated as an intruder. But rather than lash out, she allowed the moment to deepen, knowing that patience was its own kind of power. And so the humiliation played out in public view, but beneath the surface another truth was already stirring, waiting to be revealed at the right moment. The lobby, tense with whispers and sidelong glances, seemed suspended in a strange stillness. Danielle stood quietly, her calm presence clashing with Richard Hale's mounting frustration. He adjusted his tie with a sharp tug, as if tidiness could mask arrogance. But before he could press further, a new voice entered the scene. "Excuse me," said an older woman, her tone gentle but firm. She was elegantly dressed in a cream blazer, a rolling suitcase by her side. Lines of wisdom framed her face, and her voice carried the confidence of someone unafraid to speak truth aloud. She stepped closer, her eyes moving between Richard and Danielle. "I couldn't help but overhear," she continued, "and I think you might be making a mistake." Richard turned, his irritation barely hidden. "Madam, this is a private matter between management and staff. I assure you we maintain the highest standards here." The woman arched an eyebrow. "Staff?" Her gaze rested on Danielle, studying her posture, her quiet strength. Recognition flickered across her features, a memory clicking into place. "I've seen you before. Weren't you featured in Hospitality Today magazine? The story about women transforming the hotel industry?" A hush fell over the lobby. Richard's face tightened, color rising in his cheeks. He forced a short laugh. "I doubt that very much. I know my staff. This woman works here and she knows the rules. Guests deserve a certain image." Danielle remained still, her hands resting loosely at her sides. She neither confirmed nor denied the woman's observation, choosing instead to watch Richard sink deeper into his assumptions. The older guest shook her head, disapproval clear in her eyes. "Young man," she said pointedly, "you should be careful. Dismissing people based on appearance has a way of backfiring." Richard's jaw clenched. He straightened to his full height, desperate to reclaim control. "Madam, I appreciate your concern, but I've managed this property long enough to know what protects its reputation. Allowing distractions in the lobby sends the wrong message." Emily, behind the desk, pressed her lips together, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. Her conscience screamed for her to intervene, yet fear held her in place. Danielle noticed the war in her expression once again. She offered another subtle nod, encouraging but patient, letting Emily know her time would come. The older guest sighed, shaking her head. "One day you'll regret the way you've spoken. Mark my words." She wheeled her suitcase away, leaving Richard standing with his pride wounded, but intact in his own mind. He turned back to Danielle, his voice low but no less sharp. "Don't think that changes anything. My responsibility is to this hotel's image, and that means maintaining boundaries. I don't care who tries to interfere." Danielle inhaled deeply, letting the words hang in the air. She could feel the weight of every glance in the lobby, guests and staff alike sensing something was unraveling, though none yet grasped how far it would go. Her calm unnerved him. Richard's frustration deepened with each second she refused to bend. He mistook her composure for defiance and defiance for challenge. His eyes narrowed. "If you're unwilling to follow protocol, I'll be forced to take further action. Do you understand?" Danielle's gaze remained steady, her expression unreadable. Inside, her heart beat with a mixture of quiet fire and patient calculation. Every word he spoke tied another knot in the rope of his own downfall. She did not argue. She did not reveal. Not yet. Instead, she allowed him to stand taller on his fragile pedestal, knowing the moment of reckoning drew closer with each breath. The lobby resumed its muted rhythm, suitcases rolling, keys clinking, voices whispering. But beneath it all, a current of anticipation stirred. Something inevitable was approaching, and everyone who had witnessed this moment could feel it, even if they didn't yet know why. Richard Hale straightened his jacket once more, his expression fixed in the polished confidence of a man certain he held authority. Around him, the lobby had grown unusually attentive, guests pretending to focus on their own affairs, but leaning ever so slightly, eager to see how the strange tension would resolve. Danielle Brooks stood unmoved, her calm gaze unsettling in its steadiness. Inside, her patience stretched taut. She had given him more than enough rope, and he had woven arrogance into every strand. The moment for silence was ending. She spoke with deliberate clarity. "I'd like to see the owner of this hotel." Richard let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "The owner? Madam, the owner of this property is far too important to waste time on trivial issues. People in his position don't meet with staff." His voice softened into a condescending tone. "And even if they did, I assure you, you wouldn't be the one they'd meet." The irony nearly stole Danielle's breath, but she let the words linger, their foolishness echoing in the ornate lobby. She turned her head slightly toward the desk where Emily sat, her posture tense, her eyes darting nervously between them. "Would you mind," Danielle said gently, "checking my identification for me?" She slipped her hand into her bag, producing a sleek leather case. With calm precision, she handed over a card embossed with the logo of Brooks Hospitality Group. Emily accepted it with trembling fingers. Her eyes widened the moment she read the name, recognition dawning like sunlight through clouds. "Ms. Danielle Brooks," she whispered, the title catching in her throat. "Chief Executive Officer to Owner." Her voice trailed off, her gaze darting to Richard with a mixture of shock and unease. Richard's smirk faltered. He blinked, as though his vision betrayed him. "What did you say?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice steadier this time. "She's the owner, sir. The owner of the entire chain." "Brooks Hospitality Group." Gasps fluttered through the lobby. Guests who had lingered in curiosity now stared openly, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and admiration. The businessman who had earlier frowned at Richard's tone leaned back in his chair, a small, knowing smile curling at the edge of his lips. Richard's face drained of color. He stammered, his earlier arrogance collapsing under the weight of the revelation. "That's impossible. If you were the owner, why wouldn't you announce yourself?" Danielle's eyes met his, calm yet unyielding. "Because how you treat people when you don't know who they are tells me far more than rehearsed courtesy ever could." The words struck like a gavel in a courtroom. Silence followed, heavy and undeniable. Danielle allowed it to settle, her presence filling the room not with raised voice but with quiet authority. Richard opened his mouth, searching desperately for footing. I didn't mean, my intention was only to preserve the hotel's image." Danielle tilted her head, her expression unreadable, "And in doing so, you revealed exactly what image you value. Not respect, not dignity, just appearances." Emily lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed, ashamed to have been a witness, yet quietly relieved the truth had surfaced. The older guest who had spoken earlier stood a few paces away, her lips curved in quiet satisfaction, as though silently declaring, "I told you so." Danielle did not raise her voice, nor did she revel in Richard's humiliation. She simply stood in the place he had tried to banish her from, radiating the undeniable truth of who she was. The revelation hung in the air like a bell's final note, impossible to ignore, impossible to reverse. Richard Hale had mistaken the very heart of the hotel for an outsider, and in doing so, he had written the end of his own authority. The revelation still rippled through the lobby when Danielle Brooks motioned for the staff to gather. Her tone was calm, yet there was an authority in her presence that demanded attention. Emily straightened in her chair, her eyes wide, while bellhops and clerks peeked cautiously from service doors. Even guests lingered nearby, curious to see what would unfold. Richard Hale shifted nervously, tugging at his cufflinks, his earlier confidence now shattered. He tried to salvage what dignity he could muster. "Ms. Brooks, I assure you, this was simply a misunderstanding. My only goal has always been to protect the hotel's image." Danielle's gaze held him steady and unflinching. "And yet, in protecting an image, you ignored the very substance that should define this place, respect. You saw me and made a decision about who I was without asking, without listening, without even considering that dignity belongs to everyone who walks through these doors." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the chandeliers above them. Employees glanced at one another, relief flickering in their expressions, as if someone had finally voiced what many had long felt, but never dared to say. Richard opened his mouth again, but Danielle lifted a hand gently, silencing him. "This isn't the first time arrogance has poisoned a lobby, but it will be the last under my watch." She turned toward the staff, her voice carrying across the room. "From today forward, every guest and every employee will be treated with the same respect, whether they wear a suit, a uniform, or carry nothing at all. Titles do not define worth. Behavior does." Emily's eyes shimmered. She felt something shift inside her, a recognition that leadership was not about control but about integrity. Danielle's gaze met hers and she nodded softly. "And let it be noted, courage matters. I saw hesitation in this room. I saw silence when injustice was spoken aloud, but I also saw the beginnings of courage. Emily Carter, you showed restraint, but you also showed concern. That is the kind of integrity we need." Emily's breath caught. "Ms. Brooks, Danielle raised her hand gently, a smile breaking her otherwise firm expression. "You don't need to explain. Today was difficult, but tomorrow is a chance to lead differently. I'd like to see you in a supervisory role, where your voice carries weight, not just in your heart, but in policy." Emily's lips parted in shock, tears threatening to rise. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Richard flushed crimson, his composure collapsing. "Ms. Brooks, please, you can't be serious. Promoting a receptionist over a manager with years of experience. Surely you'll reconsider." Danielle turned back to him, her tone sharp but controlled. "Experience means nothing without wisdom. Authority without humility is a danger to the people we serve. You've shown me enough to know that your vision of leadership is not welcome in this company." Gasps rippled through the lobby again, this time not of surprise but of vindication. Some staff members exchanged small smiles, their shoulders relaxing as though a burden had lifted. Richard tried once more, desperation bleeding into his words. "Ms. Brooks, I beg you, this was only—" Danielle cut him off, her voice final. "This was your true character revealed. And character is what determines whether someone belongs in leadership. Your tenure here is over." Silence followed, absolute and undeniable. Richard's face slackened. His authority dissolved into nothing more than memory. Danielle let the stillness linger, then spoke again, her voice softer, carrying to every corner of the room. "This is not just about one man's mistake. It's about the culture we build together. Every person here matters, every guest, every worker. That is the legacy we will carry forward." And in that moment, the staff understood that the hotel had not only gained a new owner, but a leader who would redefine its soul. When the meeting dissolved, the lobby of the Grand Magnolia Hotel no longer felt heavy with tension. Instead, it buzzed with a quiet, renewed energy. Employees exchanged glances not of fear, but of relief and pride. Guests, still lingering, whispered among themselves about the remarkable turn they had just witnessed. Danielle Brooks, once dismissed as invisible, had redefined what leadership meant in the very heart of her own empire. She remained in the center of the lobby for a moment longer, letting her words and decisions settle into the marble and velvet of the space. In her chest, she felt the weight of years pressing forward. Every hallway she had scrubbed, every insult she had endured, every late-night study session, every rejection from bankers who doubted her, every small victory that had built into this undeniable moment. Emily approached timidly, her voice trembling but sincere. "Ms. Brooks, thank you. I never thought someone like me could be trusted with real responsibility." Danielle smiled, her eyes softening. "Emily, responsibility isn't about where you start. It's about how you carry yourself when no one's watching. You showed compassion in a moment when others chose silence. That's what leadership is built on. Never forget it." Maria, who had arrived after hearing whispers of the confrontation, found Danielle near the desk. Her grin was wide, her eyes shining with both pride and amusement. "Leave it to you to walk into your own hotel and turn it upside down in an afternoon." Danielle laughed quietly, the sound carrying both exhaustion and satisfaction. "It's not upside down, Maria. It's finally standing right side up." Together they walked through the lobby, Danielle's steps slower now, thoughtful. She paused by the grand staircase, running her fingers lightly along the polished wood railing. To her, it wasn't just craftsmanship. It was a symbol. She had once cleaned such banisters until her hands ached, unseen and unappreciated. Now she touched them not as labor, but as legacy. As she reflected, her thoughts drifted to her mother, Lorraine. She could almost hear her voice. "Tired doesn't mean defeated." That phrase had been her compass, guiding her from the small house in Montgomery to the towering hotels that now bore her name. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment, silently thanking the woman who had planted strength in her bones. Later that evening, Danielle gathered her leadership team. She spoke not of profits or expansion, but of values. "What we build here isn't measured only in occupancy rates or balance sheets," she told them. "It's measured in how people feel when they walk through our doors. Guests and employees alike. We will set the standard that every person deserves respect, no matter who they are or what they wear. That is Brooks' hospitality." Her team listened, their faces reflecting something deeper than agreement, belief. They knew they were part of something larger than business, part of a vision rooted in dignity. As the night settled over Atlanta, Danielle stood outside the hotel, the city lights casting a golden glow across the glass facade. She gazed up at the building, its name shining brightly against the dark sky. It wasn't just stone, steel, and glass. It was the embodiment of her journey, a monument to perseverance. She whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." For Danielle Brooks, the path ahead was still long. There would be new challenges, new doubts, new rivals. But tonight, she carried not only victory but clarity. Her empire was built on unshakable foundations, and to those who had watched her rise, her story was no longer just her own. It was a reminder that no matter where you start, no matter how invisible the world tries to make you, dignity and determination can change everything. Before we close, if Danielle's journey moved you, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss more stories of resilience and triumph. And don't stop here. Click on the suggested video now to continue watching another powerful story that will stay with you long after it ends.